Please, before we begin the day routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Kings West. Therefore, be resolved, this Tory government has neglected health care throughout the Annapolis Valley, and be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the day routine, presenting and reading petitions. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I beg leave to table a petition from the residents of District 12 in my constituency, and the operative clause is that the citizens group oppose any further gravel pit quarry licenses in the area of Coxseat Hills. Out of scale and out of place potential pit and quarry developments would pose a clear threat to the public health, cause irreparable damage to our natural environment, our roads, our recreation activities, and stifle positive residential growth. Mr. Speaker, the group calls upon the province of Nova Scotia and its agencies on which it may rely to join with them in opposing any further gravel pit quarry license in the Coxseat Hills. I have affixed my signature to this petition, Mr. Speaker. I certainly agree with the petition. There are 800 signatures on here, and I would like to present that to the House. Thank you very much.
Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a report of the Advisory Committee on the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act.
Report is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Speaker, I wish to table the annual report of the Guysborough-Antigonish Strait Health Authority for the year ended March 31st, 2003.
Report is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Health.
I wish to table the report of the Pictou County Health Authority for the fiscal year ended March 31st, 2003.
Report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with pleasure and pride that I rise today to inform the House that the Right Here, Right Now tourism marketing campaign for Nova Scotia was selected as the marketing campaign of the year at the National Awards for Tourism Excellence in Montreal last night. The awards were presented by the Tourism Industry Association of Canada at the 2003 National Conference on Tourism. The Right Here, Right Now marketing campaign was launched in Halifax last spring at the Halifax Citadel National Historic Site. Premier Ham was our guest as tourism operators watched the new TV and radio ads and heard what the campaign would involve. Expectations were high, and I believe this marketing campaign has done the job. You may remember, Mr. Speaker, the attention received about using a song that wasn't a traditional Nova Scotia song. The British pop song Right Here, Right Now was re-recorded by Nova Scotian musicians and became well known in the Maritime region as well as across Canada as it was seen during national programs. The campaign stood out from others that continued with more traditional approaches. It raised awareness of Nova Scotia as a vacation destination of choice and prompted more inquiries about our province than any other marketing campaign to date. If there ever was a time when we needed something that stood out, it was during this very challenging year for the tourism industry. In the end, when we look back at 2003, we'll be able to say that Nova Scotia did as well or better than any other area of Canada. Mr. Speaker, during the same event in Montreal last night, Portrayal of Halifax won the Award of Excellence in Human Resource Development. The award recognizes Portrayal's commitment to professionalism in the Canadian tourism workforce. I offer congratulations to Portrayal, which provides the centralized reservation and information system for tourism in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, as well, I offer my congratulations to Celtic Colours for making the final top 3 events as well in Canada. On a final note, members of the House, Mr. Speaker, and the public will be able to view this national award as it will be displayed right here, right now, downstairs in Province House. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to finally end and say that to make it even more special, Mr. Speaker, the award itself was made by Nova Scotian Crystal. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's too bad that tourism has been down, as we do need tourism or tourists right here, right now in Nova Scotia. So our caucus would like to send our congratulations to Portrayal for their award of Excellent in Human Resources, and also congratulate the Department of Tourism and Culture for their campaign, or their marketing campaign this year, and receiving their award last evening. It shows the talent and the dedication of the employers and employees around Nova Scotia. Unfortunately, like I said, the tourism numbers have been down this year. Some of it is from causes that we can't control, and I think you've seen a trend throughout Canada where tourism is down. But I hope with this exposure to these awards that next year will be a brighter year for our province, and that we need to do more for rural Nova Scotia to increase tourism in those communities. Many of the communities rely on tourism. The economic growth of many of these communities rely heavily on tourism, like I said, and we need to make sure that they have the support and the resources of the government so that residents from these communities can maintain or stay in these communities for employment opportunities, and not see the exodus as we see the trend right now in some of rural Nova Scotia. I look forward to this year's tourism season, and the possibility of maybe going through the Doers and Dreamers book and possibly seeing a picture of the Blue Nose this year will be promising.
Good shot.
And I just want to say again, congratulations to the 2 awards that we received here in Nova Scotia, and I hope that next year will be productive and increase our numbers here in Nova Scotia.
Thank you, David. Good job.
The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to extend my congratulations to those who deserve it most, the tourism industry of this province, the tourism owners and operators of Nova Scotia who continue to make tourism a vibrant and viable industry here at home. I do wish to extend congratulations to those who worked on the marketing campaign from all sectors, as its success is evidenced by this award. Mr. Speaker, I do, however, have reservations about the future of tourism in this province. We have seen a decline in the tourism industry here, and with this government's continuing to cut services and spending, I have a strong suspicion that tourism promotion may find itself on the Tory chopping block. It will not be enough, Mr. Speaker, for this government to bask in the glow of one award on one marketing campaign for 1 year, when the tourism industry of this province is long-term and requires a long-term commitment from this government. Cutting the budget of tourism promotion would not be a way to make this commitment, Mr. Speaker, and I would hope that this government recognizes that. The tourism industry owners and operators of this province deserve to have a commitment from government to ensure that the vibrant industry remains successful. We must continue to find innovative ways to bring people to our beautiful province that is beneficial to tourists, business owners, and operators, and most of all, the people of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Government notice the motion. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dalhousie University recently announced that it has received a $16.2 million software package of leading-edge exploration and production, or EMP, and simulation technology from Schlumberger Information Solutions, and whereas this donation of software is being used for research and to train students on how to model complex subsurface oil and gas reservoirs and to simulate fluid flow in the reservoirs, and whereas the Schlumberger Worldwide University Software Program is part of a global Schlumberger initiative that began in 1998 with the idea of providing students and staff of the Earth Sciences Department all over the world with hands-on experience and EMP simulation software. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Dalhousie University receiving this donation and the impact it will have providing Dalhousie students with enhanced educational opportunities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and notice of passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counter-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Film Development Corporation and the Atlantic Film Festival will be holding a two-day film festival November 1st and 2nd. And whereas this celebration of Nova Scotia filmmakers will screen several Nova Scotia-produced documentaries, television series, and feature films. And whereas those who attend can do so free of charge and may also be able to speak with the filmmakers about their experience in making these productions. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the Film Development Corporation and the Atlantic Film Festival for giving Nova Scotians an opportunity to experience our internationally recognized talent. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Question waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Department of Energy will be hosting the 2003 Nova Scotia Petroleum Skills Forum on November 12th and 13th in Halifax, and whereas over 200 industry leaders will meet to address challenges faced by the oil and gas industry in creating and maintaining a skills base that will meet local labor market needs and expectations, and whereas by addressing the skills gap now rather than later and by bringing together government and industry stakeholders, we'll be setting a good foundation for a prosperous oil and gas sector in Nova Scotia for years to come. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House recognize the increased commitment to further the exploration and development of our offshore industry and the significant growth and increased opportunities that will be made available to Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Michelle Raymond and Heather Watts are the co-authors of the recently released book Halifax's Northwest Arm, published by Formac, and whereas the book contains over 100 full-color illustrations, describes more than 200 years the arm and its immediate surroundings have been used for industry and pleasure, and whereas among the things this publication rediscovers are the prison, which is now the site of the Armdale Yacht Club, Fleming Park and its memorial tower, and the villages which grew up on the Arm. Therefore, be it resolved that all members congratulate Michelle Raymond and Heather Watts on the publication of Halifax's Northwest Arm and thank them for their contribution to the historical literature of Halifax. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce the following bill, which is entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, to expand standing before the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, to expand standing before the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board.
Bill 33, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, to expand standing before the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board.
Or this bill be reviewed at a second time, read at a second date. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Full Disclosure of User Fees.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Full Disclosure of User Fees.
Bill 34, entitled An Act to Provide for the Full Disclosure of User Fees.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. This may have an echo to it, I guess. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this House of Assembly is now in its third century of representation of Nova Scotians, and in each century members of this House have been authors of published works. And whereas two notable examples are Thomas Chandler Halliburton, creator of Sam Slick, and Moses Hardy Nickerson,
a poet whose books include the Songs of Summerland. And whereas the newly elected member of Halifax Atlantic is about to become the most recent Nova Scotia MLA who is also a published author, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate our colleague, the member for Halifax Atlantic, and her co-author Heather Watts on the publication tomorrow, October 29th, of the book entitled Halifax's Northwest Arm, An Illustrated History. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All in favor say aye. Contraminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas yesterday the Minister of Economic Development put forward a resolution congratulating the residents of Bridgetown who are involved in raising $420,000 for a fire hall. And whereas this fire hall will be built under the federal, provincial, and municipal infrastructure program, which has been set up to help upgrade infrastructure in rural and urban municipalities across Canada. Whereas the members of the Ham government have offered a congratulatory resolution to the people of Bridgetown on their fundraising effort, therefore be it resolved that the Ham government commit its 1/3 of infrastructure funding to the Bridgetown and surrounding communities for this fire hall today. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? Here no. Notice is tabled. Order, please. I did, and the notice was tabled. Now, member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice.
Order, please. Now, member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a Mulgrave company with 34 years of experience in the forestry, fishing, and environmental sectors was recently honored by the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce, and whereas Mulgrave Machine Works was the recipient of the Excellence in Industry Award for his commitment to his community and his ability to compete provincially, nationally, and internationally for contracts, and whereas the Machine Works design, fabrication, and repair facilities have been integral parts of Mulgrave's economy since 1969. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Sean Reid and staff of the Mulgrave Machine Works on being awarded the Excellence in Industry by the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce and wish them continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the gathering of people to honor God at a meeting place remains one of the oldest traditions of many rural communities. And whereas many churches were built over 100 years ago and these meeting places and have since been lovingly maintained. Whereas on October 26th, the congregation of the East Gore United Church celebrated 210 years of continuous worship in their community. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the congregation of East Gore and surrounding communities on their anniversary and for their steadfastness to their faith. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contraminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in recent years the Internet has served as a vehicle for fly-by-night individuals and institutions to advance the notion a university diploma is easily attained without the requirement for tests, classes, books, or interviews. And whereas these American fly-by-night operators guarantee one is assured either a bachelor's, master's, MBA, or doctorate, brackets, PhD diploma, for the most part by simply registering and paying a fee. And whereas such non-accredited institutions do little to advance and ensure high-quality education as prescribed by Nova Scotia's educational system, therefore be it resolved the Minister of Education and the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations take all appropriate steps to protect Nova Scotians from such low-grade educational promotions. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? Here no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas patient navigation is a community-based service providing education and supportive care to adults, children, and families living with cancer, and whereas Joanne Hughes, Ann Berry, and Alice Lieberman of the South Shore District Health Authority have partnered with Cancer Care Nova Scotia to improve patient access to services and resources, improve patient care, and to better prepare and educate patients and their families. And whereas Dr. Andrew Padmas and Sandra Cook of Cancer Care Nova Scotia have established an effective partnership with those working in patient navigation for the South Shore District Health Authority, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House recognize all those involved in the patient navigation program for their dedication to supporting patients living with cancer for the establishing this very worthwhile program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, there was a notice of motion came forward from the member for Cape Breton West. I was wondering if he could read hereby it is resolved again.
Just before I do that, it's extremely hard to hear when there's a lot of chatter in the room when we're voting on these resolutions. I'd ask all members to keep the noise down so that the chair can hear the response from the members. The honourable member for Cape Breton West on the therefore be resolved of this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the be it resolved is therefore be it resolved the Minister of Education and the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations take all appropriate steps to protect Nova Scotians from such low-grade educational promotions. And I ask for a waiver of notice and passage.
Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 5 retired Pictou County teachers unveiled their new book, Slates to Computers, on October 26th at the Hector National Exhibit Center in Pictou. And whereas this book is a group of histories of more than 40 one-room schoolhouses that gave way to make West Pictou consolidated, and each is written by a community person who knew that school. And whereas this book is dedicated to the memory of Alex Dunn, the much-loved and respected West Pictou Consolidated School custodian from 1971 until 1986, therefore be it resolved that the members of this legislature congratulate Doris McMillan, Joy Robley, Marjorie Fraser, Janet McKay, and Dolina Battis for compiling a great book, Slates to Computers, and wish them every success in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 5, 2003, Reverend Jane Clattenburg celebrated her first service as the new rector of St. Peter's Anglican Church, Birch Cove, and whereas Reverend Clattenburg held a special celebration of new ministry on October 26th for parish members, friends, and neighbors to worship together and meet the new rector, and whereas the active congregation of St. Peter's Anglican Church, Birch Cove, has been serving the communities of Birch Cove, Rockingham, Clayton Park, Wedgwood, and Princess Lodge since its dedication in 1951. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Reverend Jane Clattenburg and wish her well in her new ministry at St. Peter's. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Gloria Demers of Truro will receive the Jim Thompson Award as the Canadian Special Olympics Volunteer of the Year on November 25, 2003. Whereas Gloria Demers will receive her award at the annual Sports Celebrities Festival, which raises funds to promote Special Olympics in Canada. Whereas Gloria Demers has devoted 22 years to the Cobequid Regional Special Olympics program and is currently the sports coordinator. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Gloria Demers on being named the Canadian Special Olympics Volunteer of the Year and thank her for the 22 years of time and effort she's given to the Cobequid Region Special Olympics program. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in July of 1998, the provincial government undertook a review of the Residential Tenancies Act by preparing a discussion paper on tenant-landlord issues called Looking for Direction. And whereas this discussion paper involved the participation of stakeholders like the Tenants Association, individual tenants, the Investment Property Owners Association, mobile and many homeowners, the Metropolitan Housing Authority, Manufacturing Housing Association of Nova Scotia, the then Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and Dalhousie Legal Aid. And whereas the written comments and recommendations were to be forwarded to the then Minister of Business and Consumer Affairs on November the 15th of 1998. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister responsible for Residential Tenancies Act provide the members of the Legislative Assembly with a copy of their comments and recommendations on the amendments to the Act. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver? I hear no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Finance has been unable to explain why the province's finances are in such a deplorable state, and whereas his deputy minister and staff, like all public servants, are doing their best in what can be described as trying circumstances. And whereas a coalition of NDP and PC members have joined forces to prevent the appearance of the Deputy Minister of Finance before the Public Accounts Committee, where he could provide knowledgeable answers to their questions. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister and the Leader of the NDP advise their respective members of the Public Accounts Committee that if they are to be effective, they should not be preventing Nova Scotians from learning the truth. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There are several noes. The notice is tabled. The honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cape Breton's smallest First Nations community has been designated a place of national historic significance by Heritage Canada. Whereas Chapel Island is home to many ancient burial sites dating back hundreds of years. And whereas Chapel Island has been an important centre of the Roman Catholic faith for the Mi'kmaq since the mid-18th century when the French erected a Catholic church in the area. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join with Heritage Canada in recognizing the historic significance of Chapel Island and congratulate Chief Wilbert Marshall and all the members of the Chapel Island community on having Chapel Island designated a place of national historic significance. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the need for a clear road plan for improvements in Timberlea Prospect is evident, whereas the road to the Sandy Cove Lighthouse and the SS Atlantic Park needs attention, whereas Nova Scotians deserve to drive on safe, well-maintained roads. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister of Transportation list the priorities for road improvements in the provincial constituency of Timberlea Prospect.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in Atlantic Canada, breast cancer continues to be the most frequently diagnosed cancer in women, with more than twice as many new cases as lung cancer. And whereas Belleville Motors organized a run for the cure for breast cancer in late September in both Church Point and West Pubnico, and whereas these runs raised $10,819.95, which will be used for research in finding a cure for breast cancer, therefore be resolved that all members of the legislature extend our best wishes and gratitude to Belleville Motors, their staff and volunteers for their active role in the national campaign Run for the Cure for Breast Cancer. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Question for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Mothers Against Drunk Driving organization has opened a new chapter to serve the residents of Lunenburg and Queens County, and whereas volunteers will continue to promote public awareness around the dangers of impaired driving and its horrible consequences, and whereas our government continues to work closely with MAD Canada to combat this violent crime, therefore it be resolved that the House congratulate the staff and volunteers of MAD Canada who will work to promote driving safety in Lunenburg and Queens County. And I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers, it agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the final week of the 2003 election campaign, the Conservatives made a particular promise to residents of Chester St. Margaret's. And whereas the governing Conservatives promised that they would review the license for the Horse Island Finfish aquaculture site in Northwest Cove. And whereas residents of Northwest, Southwest, and Tilly's Cove have not been contacted about such a review, nor have they seen any sign that the promised review is underway. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urges the government to keep faith with residents of Chester St. Margaret's by immediately proceeding with the promised review of the Horse Island Finfish aquaculture project and by ensuring that concerned residents can participate fully in that review. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Agreed. Here no. Notice the table. Order, please. The Honourable Member Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Beehive Adult Service Center is a vocational training center for individuals with special needs, and whereas the Beehive Adult Service Center opened in 1968 in the South Berwick Community Hall to provide programs for 4 individuals and later moved to Aylesford in 1969, and whereas the Beehive Adult Service Center now provides programs for 30 residents in the western region of Kings County, programs focusing on job skills and life skills, including woodworking, sewing, baking, and operating the Enviro Depot for the Resource Recovery Fund Board. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate the client, staff, volunteers, and board members on the occasion of their 35th anniversary in the community and wish them all the best in their future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, November 1, 2003, the Digby chapter of Mothers Against Drunk Driving will launch the Red Ribbon Kickoff campaign at the Digby Center. Whereas this Red Ribbon campaign will raise funds for the Digby chapter so that they can continue to provide victim services and work with the community in an effort to raise awareness and prevent the violent crime of drunk driving. And whereas the Red Ribbon has become a well-recognized symbol which serves not only as a tribute to those who have lost their lives in impaired driving accidents, but also as a reminder to drive safe and sober at all times. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature extend their best wishes to Mrs. Helen Winchester, President of the MAD Digby County Chapter, and all the volunteers as they embark on their 2003 Red Ribbon Campaign. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Village of Kingston, under the coordination of Kelly Rice and the Village Commission, became a pilot for Active Kids, Healthy Kids program, whereas 1,200 students, including the students of Kingston Elementary, assembled at Pine Ridge Middle School to kick off this innovative program. Whereas this program is designed to provide a long-term health outcomes through alternative activities and lifestyle changes. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate the Village of Kingston, Pine Ridge Middle School, and Kingston Elementary students for their enthusiasm and energy as they engage in this Active Kids, Healthy Kids program. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Weymouth Kiwanis Club kicked off a fundraising campaign a few months ago for the Weymouth Medical Center. Whereas this campaign has raised over $180,000 towards this new facility and the purchase of medical equipment. Whereas this campaign's great success was made possible through the support of many residents and volunteers of Digby County. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the Weymouth Kiwanis Club for a very successful fundraising campaign and making the Weymouth Medical Center a reality. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:43 and at 1:43. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Executive Officer of the Capital District Health Authority has admitted that the new limits on overtime will affect patient care, even though he's hoping that they won't have a major impact. Mr. Ford has admitted that the new measures will create more stress, and nurses are saying that they are gravely concerned about what this means for patient care. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health is happy to support these measures. So my question to the Minister of Health is this: at what point is he prepared to admit that he and his government have broken their promise that frontline health care will not be affected by the current budget reduction exercise?
Question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have in fact increased funding to the district by over $27 million. We have also, Mr. Speaker, we have indicated support to the District Health Authority for the fact that they have decided they're going to manage the overtime, which is a number previously of $7 million, Mr. Speaker, and their objective is to reduce that to $6 million, Mr. Speaker. We cannot help but indicate our support for that effort at management. We have their assurances, Mr. Speaker, that the health care of patients will be front and center in their area of concern. And I also share their concern, Mr. Speaker, that our nurses not become worn out and tired as a result of excessive overtime.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to table a copy of the staff replacement tracking form, which must now be completed prior to approving any overtime at the Capital District. This form is a patronizing series of bureaucratic questions that is eating up valuable bedside time for nurses. It allows only a minimum standard of patient care, replacing RNs with other staff, a policy, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that is in direct contravention of the Canadian Nurses Association position statement, which reads, "The safety of clients must never be compromised by substituting less qualified workers where the competencies of a registered nurse are required." So my question for the Minister of Health is this: when will you admit that these policy changes cannot be supported, and that he will have to put an end to the budget reduction exercises and meet with the DHAs to discuss this?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we have made considerable progress with all of the DHAs in this province in coming to meeting their budget targets of a balanced budget. 7 of the DHAs, Mr. Speaker, are virtually there with respect to a balanced budget. 2 others we're working very closely with, and the Capital District we're working closely with as well. Mr. Speaker, we have the assurance of the Capital District that the steps that they have taken will not impact negatively on patient care to the detriment of patients. And I repeat again, Mr. Speaker, that we support them in their endeavor to manage their resources and to meet their budget requirements. Mr. Speaker, I don't accept the philosophy of members opposite to simply throw money at problems every time something arises. There are management tools that can be put in place, and they're being used.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister, I believe, is derelict in his duty because nurses are telling us that the only thing these measures are going to accomplish is the burnout of existing staff. And regrettably, Mr. Speaker, they are also telling us that the last time they were treated with this kind of disrespect by this government was during Bill 68. Last week, it was hiring freezes and bed closures. This week, it's freezing overtime and attendant care. But all of it amounts to broken promises by this government. So my question to the Premier is, since your Minister of Health has clearly let this situation get completely out of hand, and since he has been unable to work with nurses and hospital administrators to avoid impacting patient care, will you step in and resolve the situation so that patients will not suffer?
Will the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, through you, I can say to the member opposite that this government will continue to manage the taxpayers' dollars responsibly. We will ask each and every agency, including the DHAs, to work effectively with each and every tax dollar they receive to provide the services that Nova Scotia require. We must require of all of the agencies that we fund good business management practices that extract 100 cents out of every dollar.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Despite assurances to the contrary, it's clear that now the cuts that are necessary are happening at the front line for Nova Scotians. The Premier received 2 days ago, as did I, a letter from a woman who says that her mother had her knee surgery canceled just minutes before the knee replacement operation was supposed to happen because there weren't beds available in the hospital where she was to have the surgery. My question is for the Premier. Will you admit that the promise not to cut into frontline healthcare services has been broken?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I can say to the member opposite, in case he has forgotten, this government has provided on the operational side of the budgets of our hospital this year an increase in funding of 7.5%, which we believe will allow them to provide at least equivalent services to those they were able to provide in the year previous. The member opposite understands that the cancelling of surgeries is not something that has only started to occur recently. I've been involved in the healthcare delivery sector since 1963. There have always been circumstances where at the last minute surgeries had to be canceled for unforeseen circumstances. So in an individual case, while it's unfortunate because people do get very emotionally ready for surgery, but what the member opposite describes is not something that only started happening yesterday.
Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is right that it didn't start happening yesterday. It's been happening for the last 4 years. And if I were to remind the Premier, the 7.5% that he just spoke of is in fact largely...
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier was reminding me that the 7.5% that the government came forward with is in this year's budget, but I would remind the Premier that of that 7.5%, only 2 or 2.5 of that actually comes from provincial money. The rest is all federal money. The cuts that are coming, Mr. Speaker, are the result of financial mismanagement by this government. My question for the Premier, will the Premier assure Nova Scotians that he will put a stop to any cuts to frontline healthcare services as a result of their $32 million worth of cuts?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can remind the member opposite that, in fact, budgets have increased. There have been no cuts. But I also cannot resist the temptation to remind the member opposite that the federal government is not ponying up its share of healthcare delivery funding.
Yeah.
The Romano report was very, very specific. The federal government should have started with 18%, increasing that funding by 1% until it reached 25% of healthcare funding in our province. They have failed to follow the recommendations of their own committee.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your final supplementary.
One more. Mr. Speaker, the scapegoats are
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has the floor.
The DHAs, have not been able to manage, but it's clear that the scapegoats are starting already. It's clear that this government is not going to be able to either balance its budget or provide frontline health care services that Nova Scotians need, and we're seeing it day to day, and we're seeing it in the Office of Health Promotion. Will the Premier admit that there are cuts coming to the Office of Health Promotion, the much vaunted Office of Health Promotion, as a result of these tax cuts?
Now will the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister responsible for health promotion.
Minister of Health Promotion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member, Mr. Speaker. The budget this year is roughly in the $15 million range. We have made a commitment to double that budget over the next 4 years during our mandate, and we will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Now I'm a member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, we learned that the Capital Health Authority was limiting overtime and attendant care in order to balance their budget. Yesterday, the Minister of Health said he approves of these measures, even though nurses and frontline healthcare professionals are telling him that it will affect patient care, Mr. Speaker. According to the memo, attendants are to be used only in exceptional circumstances. For example, there is, and I quote, a high risk of the patient causing extreme harm to self or others. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned that putting that kind of qualifier on the use of attendants means that there are some patients who will not receive care and the services they need. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is this. Will he explain to the House today how it will not affect frontline health care if people are being told to wait until a patient may cause extreme harm to themselves before being permitted to provide attendant care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that we're dealing with a situation where the District Health Authority is going to begin managing overtime more effectively than they have in the past. They were spending $7 million in overtime, Mr. Speaker. They're trying to reduce that to a level of $1 million. Good management, Mr. Speaker, will be supported by this government. Mr. Speaker, we also have the commitment from the Health Authority that they will continue to ensure that good, sound patient care is in effect at all times. That's the qualifier, Mr. Speaker, that we're relying on. And, Mr. Speaker, we have committed to additional funding in an increase of 7.1%. We added $27 million to the Capital Health Authority this year alone. We expect them to manage within their budget, Mr.
Y'all member Halifax Needham, and your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the Minister and the Premier that the reason we have attendant care is to replace patient restraint that really harmed patients in hospital cares, and the Premier will know this. Mr. Speaker, the memo goes on to say that, quote, each request for an attendant will be supported by an evaluation of all options, including family assistance, private pay, and alternatives to attendant use. Now, Mr. Speaker, private pay for health care in a hospital, this is not acceptable. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is how can the Minister of Health justify offloading patient care onto families or requiring patients to pay for their own attendance?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the budget for that part of the DHA's operation has increased from $1.6 million to over $3 million in the period of a year, Mr. Speaker. Surely it's appropriate when there's an increase in expenditures of that magnitude that some action be taken to evaluate the expenditures and the validity of those expenditures. That action is something that we are prepared to support. Again, Mr. Speaker, we do so with the commitment from the District Health Authority that patient care will be first and foremost in their decision making.
Now, member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister talks about numbers, but we talk about patients.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the memo outlines a lengthy process for approval to use attendant care. That's time away from the bedside, and it's also critical time if the patient is a high-risk patient. Yesterday, the minister said he supports the measures that Capital Health is taking. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is simple. How can he support measures that withhold services from high-risk patients?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, numbers are a significant aspect of the delivery of health care in this province, especially with the capital district, where they serve over 400,000 patients a year, Mr. Speaker, and the budget is over $477 million in a single year. Mr. Speaker, we have a responsibility to be conscious of the numbers, provided that consciousness is done with the priority being the delivery of good health care and care of patients and consideration for the hours worked by nurses on the floors, Mr. Speaker, and that's what a review of overtime and good management of overtime achieves.
Order, please. Order, please. Like to remind the honourable members to keep in mind the length of the questions and the answers, please. The honourable member Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, recent media attention is focused on the restriction of overtime at the Capital District Health Authority. And Mr. Speaker, no matter what the Minister of Health says, that restriction is going to impact hands-on, frontline patient care. It's going to create a more stressful work environment. It could potentially lead to the exodus of nurses from this province, Mr. Speaker. On October 18th, the spokesperson for the Department of Health stated the department would very seriously consider requests for money from the Capital District to pay for overtime or extra staff. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister is, has the Minister received a request for assistance to pay for overtime and extra staff to deal with the impact of Hurricane Juan?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No.
Honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's a very serious issue that's going to impact patient care at the QE2. We have to get at the bottom of it. The memo sent to staff was very clear. It states that the damage done by Hurricane Juan to facilities is putting even greater demand on resources that are already overstretched and overcommitted. So my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, why won't the Minister then just simply pick up the phone and offer the assistance to the Capital District before something serious happens to frontline patient care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I need to be a bit more expansive in my answer on this occasion. Perhaps you'll permit me that time. Mr. Speaker, the situation to which the honourable member refers, of course, was a period where nurses and staff at the healthcare providers at the Capital District were under considerable stress just to get the facility back in operation. As I indicated to members of the House previously, Mr. Speaker, we are talking about nurses who were literally carrying as fast as they could equipment and pushing equipment and getting it out of harm's way so that it would be preserved and not have to be replaced. The Capital District very wisely made a decision that they could not push that workforce any further. They could not ask their nurses to work any harder to put additional time in. They managed, and they managed appropriately, and Mr. Speaker, I applaud all who have worked in that recovery.
Now, Member Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the government has found itself in a very serious game of tug-of-war, with the health care needs of Nova Scotians at stake. They need to find $54 million this year in order to balance the budget, and then find $147 million to pay for that silly tax scheme, Mr. Speaker. And to do that, they're prepared to accept a negative impact on frontline direct patient care. And they're also prepared to accept the consequences of further increased wait times as a result of Hurricane Juan, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister is, how can the Minister of Health state in the media that there will be no impact to frontline health care when clearly Clearly, Mr. Speaker, there will be.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The process that is underway is one of effective management. Effective management of overtime is one of the criteria. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member references his concern for healthcare workers. Excessive overtime is not productive, and excessive overtime does not lead to good nursing because nurses are tired as a result of that. So, Mr. Speaker, the management plan that is in effect is one which will be very effective. And I can remind the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that last October his leader said that he in fact would balance the books of this province by cutting spending on health care. That, Mr. Speaker, is their answer.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. In 1988, the Auditor General raised concerns about timely budgeting for the regional health boards and followed up the next year by saying, quote, the Department of Health should review and approve or disapprove key planning documents which are submitted by its partners in health on a timely basis. It is essential for these organizations to know on a timely basis whether these initiatives are approved, end of quote. At this point, Mr. Speaker, today in 2003, the district health authorities are still more than halfway into the budget year waiting for their budgets to be approved. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, why has this government not acted on the Auditor General's recommendation for timely budgeting for the district health authorities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we have been involved with a very effective consultation with the district health authorities regarding their business plans. And as a result of that consultation, Mr. Speaker, we have identified a figure of $19.2 million additional funding which should be provided to the district health authorities. We have provided that funding. It has become part of the base of their operation. That is as a result of the consultations that we have had. We have also agreed, Mr. Speaker, that we should look at the cost of additional items relative to their operation related to contract agreements that we should consider. We're evaluating those, and Mr. Speaker, we will be responding to that in a manner that will relieve pressure on the health authorities. So, Mr. Speaker, the process that we have been involved in has been effective in
Order,
identifying...
please. Order, please. The honourable member Halifax Fairview, the first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear about this. We are almost 7 months into the budget year, and the district health authorities still do not have approved budgets. Last year, the Premier seemed to recognize that there was a problem. That's when he said that he favored secure funding for 3 years and stability for health authorities. But at this point, the DHAs are still waiting for their budgets. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Why has the Premier changed his mind about the need for district health authorities to get timely budget approval?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And one of the advantages that we have provided to the DHAs is that they now have in terms of institutional funding, a multi-year commitment, a 3-year commitment. We are the first province in Canada to give the hospital community that kind of financial flexibility to allow long-term planning. What the member opposite is really referring to is the business plans that do have to be approved by the Department of Health. And to do that appropriately, it does require a certain amount of examination, discussion, re-examination, and discussion. But the process is moving along. But the regional district health authorities now have the advantage. They know in advance the amount of money they are going to receive.
Member for Halifax Fairview, and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when the Conservative Party was in opposition, their health critics said, quote,
The government is letting the pressure build on the bottom lines of the regional health boards in order to relieve the pressure on its own bottom line. End of quote. And that is exactly what they are doing now, today, that they're on the other side of the House. Yep. So, Mr. Speaker, my final question to the Minister of Health. When will this government provide the budgets to the district health authorities so that they and all of us can see their bottom line?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Very soon, Mr. Speaker. However, I want to add to what has already been said about the additional funding, the long-term funding that's been committed, that we have also come in the term of this government from a situation where health authorities were operating on double-digit deficits on an annual basis. Mr. Speaker, that number has been reduced to the point where now we're dealing with numbers that are less than 1% of the budget of this province relative to the financial challenges of the district health authorities. We have made tremendous progress, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to make more progress in operating.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on September 19th of this year, with the NDP members and members of our caucus, we appeared and had a meeting with the Minister of Finance and his officials. And at that time, we asked questions about the state of the province's finances. When we left the meeting, there were more questions than answers. I wrote a letter on that same day, September 19th, to the Minister of Finance, and in that, I said, and I'll table this for the House, I would like to take you up on your agreement to have further briefings on the state of the province's finances as soon as possible. Now, the minister did respond to me, but he said on that occasion that any follow-up meeting would have to happen after October 10th when he was meeting with the federal Minister of Finance. I conveyed our disappointment in a letter back to him and repeated our request for a meeting as soon as possible. It is now October 28th. My question for the Minister of Finance is, when will the Minister of Finance agree to sit down, meet with the opposition parties, and discuss with them the state of the province's finances?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And there's a number of issues that we had talked about at our meeting in September, as the Honourable Member indicated. I anticipate meeting with the members of the opposition and indeed bringing forth more information to the people of Nova Scotia within the next 2 weeks.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to that meeting, and I hope that it does indeed come in the next 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee exists to help ensure that governments are held accountable for their fiscal situation. And our members made a clear request to that committee on October 8th, repeated on October 15th, that we wanted the Deputy Minister of Finance to appear before the Public Accounts Committee to speak about the challenges of equalization in this province. Yesterday, I received a memo from the Chair of Public Accounts signaling more delays. And given the pressing questions of equalization, Mr. Speaker, this is a troubling development that I intend to raise at Public Accounts tomorrow. My question for the Minister of Finance is, will he today publicly assure Nova Scotians and members of his caucus that he has no objection to the Deputy Minister of Finance appearing before Public Accounts a week from tomorrow, November 15th, 2003?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Department of Finance has always worked with all the different boards and commissions that have been around, and we will continue to do that. As people are looking for information, we will provide them, and as people request people to come, we will be happy to do that. Mr. Speaker, if we have a request from people, I'm sure we will be able to accommodate.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, in your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the issue goes to delays that are happening. And this government has earned itself a reputation for being elusive, if not secretive, with respect to the finances of the province, and it appears that they may have found some allies in Public Accounts. Right. Our question is whether or not, my question is for the Premier, whether or not, given the answer from the Minister of Finance, whether or not he will signal publicly today to the people of his caucus and to Nova Scotians that he has no objections to the Deputy Minister of Finance appearing before Public Accounts a week from tomorrow, November 5th, 2003.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that when the public accounts sets its agenda, the agenda will be followed, and the people in this government, both on the political side and the administrative side, are prepared to cooperate with public accounts.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, an alarming number of employment support and income assistance clients and potential clients are complaining about their inability to get help when they need it. Phone calls go for weeks on return for routine inquiries, and even in crisis situations, speaking to a caseworker is a challenge. In 2002, the NSGEU released a report into casework levels at community services. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, when will community services agree to an overall joint labour management approach to addressing these issues?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for bringing up the point that we've got over 32,000 cases with community services staff. They work very diligently to serve those clients, and by and large, Mr. Speaker, I am comfortable that the reports back that I'm getting both from clients and from staff are that they are well satisfied with the service.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in this caseload overload report tabled in the legislature last year, a client states, quote, files end up lying around and this is a liability issue. Some are as old as 3 months without having been addressed, end of quote.
No problem.
The report points out that although workers cannot meet department standards, there is no clear liability protection in place if tragedy should befall a client. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister through you, how many clients are falling through the cracks because there's a shortage of staff available to help them in a timely manner?
Good question.
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for giving me the opportunity to point out that we're well on our way to being completely computerized within the department. The idea of files being left lying about would seem odd because it's at the stroke of a key that you can draw a client's file up and deal with it. I would say that before I was minister, I had the pleasure of going in and working with the local supervisor for on behalf of clients. I found that they were very efficient, and I think that well able to deal with the expectations of them.
Now, member of Dartmouth South Portland Valley, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issue here is timely response, which is impossible for the current staff at Community Services due to the caseload. Mr. Speaker, a senior staff member indicated recently that the staff-to-client ratio at Employment Support and Income Assistance is 1 to 160.
Well, that's okay.
That person admits caseworkers rely heavily on phone contact. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, how can he expect workers to adequately meet the needs of clients having complex issues with infrequent phone calls?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, actually, this gives me a chance to point out that the very significant decline in the community services caseload during the term of this government and the previous John Ham government has in fact lightened the caseloads. And in fact, during a resolution last week, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member got up and questioned the point that I made that we're still putting just as much money into employment support and income assistance, and she was questioning that assertion. And what I would like her to do is perhaps go to the estimates, and she would find that there's more than one line in the estimates, and that in fact we are keeping the support in there for the existing client load, even though there are fewer of them, and they are getting better service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member of Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, today my question is for the Minister of the Environment and Labour. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I presented in this House a petition with over 800 names of residents from Coxsee and area, a residential and agricultural community in Cape Breton South.
And Mr. Speaker, this petition is against the establishment of a quarry in their area. I have met with a committee of residents, Mr. Speaker, who say they do not want a quarry anywhere near the Coxheath area, and the Cape Breton Regional Councillor, Claire Dethridge, agrees with that stand. Mr. Speaker, this is a residential area almost exclusively made up of owner-occupied homes with substantial property investments. Mr. Speaker, they have a right to protect their property, and they do not want a quarry. My question to the Minister. Mr. Minister, are you aware of any application to your department for a permit to operate a quarry in Coxheath?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm not aware of any application.
The Honourable Member of Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. My first supplementary. Mr. Speaker, recently a large parcel of land, 350 acres to be exact, was purchased in Coxheath by a company who would have interest in a quarry operation with their construction business. And I will table a map, Mr. Speaker, that shows clearly how close this property that was purchased is to the residential areas in question. And Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary to the Minister. Mr. Minister, have you personally or has your department been made aware of this purchase and its possible use by the new owners of the property?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And no, I haven't been made aware, and I certainly will look into this and ensure that I get up to date on the issue.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Well, I might say, Mr. Speaker, that nobody buys 350 acres of land in an area to look at it, and it's particularly a construction company. So I would imagine if the Minister hasn't heard, he will. Mr. Speaker, the residents of Coxheath and surrounding areas are understandably worried about their properties in this well-planned suburban neighbourhood and do not want their lives upset by the possibility of a quarry in their midst. And my final supplementary to the Minister. Will you, Mr. Minister, guarantee these concerned residents that you will visit the site and meet with the concerned residents affected before you issue any permit for a quarry in the Coxheath area?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly will guarantee that we will follow the rules that are in place and that we will ensure that everything takes place as it should. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Tourism and Culture. Employees at Sherbrooke Village in Guysborough County have been notified that full-time staff will be cut by 20%. Staff will see their wages and hours cut dramatically. One long-time employee will be taking home under $250 a week after December 17th. A hard thing to take just before Christmas, Mr. Speaker.
Ronnie.
This staff member, like many others in the community, are very concerned about the cuts to a major source of employment in an economically challenged area. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Tourism and Culture is, why is the Sherbrooke Village hit so hard by funding cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Through you to the member, Mr.
Order,
Speaker.
please. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, last year the budget for the Sherbrooke Village was $919,610. This year, Mr. Speaker, the budget for the Sherbrooke Village is $919,610, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, Sherbrooke, like many other museums, Mr. Speaker, no, there wasn't a cut. It was the same amount as last year. And, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is, like many other museums, Mr. Speaker, with less visitation, it affected their revenue this year. They have to make some changes, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that they live within their means and live within their budget. They are making those needed changes, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2003 tourism figures show that Eastern Shore only gets 2% of the tourism dollars spent in Nova Scotia.
Bill Dukes.
This part of the province
Dukes.
actually gets the lowest tourism income in any region of the province, which means it has the highest potential.
Yep. That's the way
A
to look
report
at it.
from the Guysborough County Regional Development Authority cites the government downsizing as one of the major barriers for economic growth in the area. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, what consideration was given to the special status of Guysborough County when Sherbrooke Village started funding cuts?
Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my last answer, the amount the amount that the province of Nova Scotia, through the Department of Tourism and Culture, gives this year, and relative to last year, is the same amount of money, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, over a $900,000 investment in Sherbrooke Village is a significant investment on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia, and it does make a difference for the people of the Eastern Shore, and we will continue to make a difference for the people of the Eastern Shore, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've seen this year, there's been a decrease in tourism in our province, which makes next year most important for these communities, especially in rural Nova Scotia, to be able to sustain their growth and hopefully increase their tourism in those areas, especially in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Guysborough County suffers from one of the highest rates of out-migration in Canada, and the young people leaving this area are the most highly trained and skilled. The communities rely on Sherbrooke Village for jobs and for an ability to survive devastating blows to other resource sectors in their community. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, how can the people of Guysborough grow their economy if one of the two major attractions is cut back?
There you go.
Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the board there is doing a very good job on behalf of the Sherbrooke Village, and is doing a very good job with respect, Mr. Speaker, to heritage in our province.
Order, please. Order, please. No, Minister of Tourism and Culture. Order, please, or we'll be saying goodbye to a few members very shortly. On both sides of the House. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, the Commission is doing an excellent job in Sherbrooke, Mr. Speaker. They do have a budget which they have to live within, but Mr. Speaker, the member is asserting that there have been cuts made this year compared to last year from the Department of Tourism and Culture, and it's false, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is the same investment is being made this year as was last year.
The Honourable Member of Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the minister responsible for Sydney Steel. For some reason, it seems that this government isn't interested in telling Nova Scotians what's happening at Sydney Steel. There hasn't been one recent update from this government about the progress at the site. Instead, this government has passed the buck on to Ernst & Young. And when you visit the Ernst & Young website, Mr. Speaker, it's very scant on details. Even if you go to Cisco website, some things like demolition were not updated, last updated in May. Since there's a great deal riding on this from both the government standpoint and from the community standpoint, I want to ask the minister, why has your government refused to be forthcoming about what's happening at Sydney Steel?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's any lack of information with regard to what's going on at Sydney Steel. If the honourable member has any questions respecting Sydney Steel, I'll ask them to address them to me.
Now, member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Throwaway answers like that don't do anyone any good, Mr. Speaker. Nobody good. Mr. Speaker, with people's livelihoods at stake, and the situation needs to be treated more seriously than this, Mr. Speaker. In August, there were allegations that corners were being cut in chemical sampling, Mr. Speaker. Ex-steelworkers have been telling me that interviews are ongoing for dismantling work at this present time, but they're not being given straight answers on when things will be started, Mr. Speaker. Does this, my question, Mr. Speaker, through you, does the minister actually know what real state of affairs is at Sydney Steel? And if so, why won't he update the members of this House before the session is adjourned?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member was looking for an up-to-date status report on what's going on at Sydney Steel, he's welcome to it, and I'll provide it to him.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier made a commitment that he would take care of steelworkers. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that most of the steelworkers I talk to these days don't feel like they've been treated very well by this government, Mr. Speaker. Exactly. Will the minister commit to delivering a full explanation of the state of affairs at Sydney Steel to all members of this House before the session is adjourned? Will he make that commitment today?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, every separated steel worker from the Sydney Steel has been offered a position in the remediation when those positions are available. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, I would suggest, is trying to suggest that there's something going on at the site that that is being hidden from the people of Sydney. That's not so, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the site is open to people from Sydney if they wish to go out and tour the site, except they must make arrangements to do so.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, when the federal government contributed $18.6 million to the affordable housing program in September of 2002, the former minister committed to matching those funds and announced that up to 1,500 affordable housing units would be built. However, Mr. Speaker, the minister has not lived up to that commitment. In August, his response to criticism that he hadn't spent money, if any of that money was, quote, simply needed time to get a plan ready. So my question to the minister, after almost 14 months of sitting on this fund, has the minister managed to find the time to formulate a plan? And if so, would he share this plan with members of the House today?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's one of my favorite subjects, actually, because I am looking forward to many announcements over the ensuing months. In fact, we have agreed on a way forward, and we are preparing the appropriate material for an official launch. And of course, Mr. Speaker, in fact, we have already opened up one of the affordable housing units that have come out of this program.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe to reference the minister's own previous statements, 20 out of 1,500 is not exactly something to jump up with joy about at this juncture. Mr. Speaker, when this federal provincial fund was set up, certain conditions were agreed upon for the expenditure of money. So my question to the minister, will the minister explain to this House his obligations as he sees them in administering the expenditure of the $36 million affordable housing program?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite is quite right. There are stipulations in terms of how we are able to invest that money into affordable housing in the province. That is administered by the federal government through Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation and, of course, through my department here in Nova Scotia. The program that is coming forward will address both CMHC's concerns and our own concerns as a province.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister indicated last April that he was cutting $8.9 million out of this program. So obviously the province is looking at reducing its financial commitment to this program. So my question to the minister, will he confirm for all members of the House today that he's been paying attention to the issue of cutting funding from this program, more so, and if not as much, as he is focused on the original commitment of 1,500 affordable housing units?
The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I try to be positive about the federal government's involvement in this. Yes, back in 1993, they did pull out of public housing, and it was a welcome change to see them coming back and accept this responsibility. When they made that decision back in '93, the province undertook to administer the public housing portfolio. We've done well during that time, partly because of lower interest rates, and we've developed something which we call the deferred federal contribution account in the corporation, in the housing corporation, and that gives us some flexibility as to the monies that we draw out in any given year, and that's what we're referring to. There were no cuts, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Acting Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, many woodlot owners hit by Hurricane Juan were already suffering as a result of the brown spruce longhorn beetle, and their woodlots were under quarantine. Hurricane Juan was the second crisis to hit these woodlot owners. Now even more of their woodlots have been destroyed. On Friday, the federal agricultural minister said he'd be willing to work with the province to help these owners salvage some of their wood before it was too late. So my question for the acting minister, will you work with the federal government to designate a mill to handle the quarantine wood?
The honourable acting minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite and to the House, as well as people involved in the woods industry. Obviously, the same rules that applied with the brown longhorn beetle in regard to quarantine will apply for wood affected from the areas, and there was a mill designated to handle that wood within that zone, and I assume those same rules will apply.
The honourable member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That may be a large assumption, and the minister should be aware that the volume of wood that is presently needed to be processed is probably greater than anybody had expected, so there may be a need for another mill or other mills to be designated. So I want to ask the minister, when can we expect your government to push the case with the federal minister to designating other mills for these infected woods?
The Honourable the Acting Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you very much. And obviously, the member opposite is making a number of assumptions. But I think the guidelines are very clear when you're dealing with CFIA and an invasive species. And certainly, the quarantine area is where that wood has been milled if the bark hasn't been removed previously at the site of origin for the wood. And those rules will be applied to whether it's 1 mill or 10 mills when that wood is processed, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Well, I hate the thought that maybe making assumptions would somehow put me in the same line of thought as the acting minister, but I want the minister to be aware that we're aware already of the rules that have to be applied. What we're asking the minister is if he'll push for other mills to be designated to handle that extra volume of wood. So can I get a commitment from the minister today that he'll push the federal minister on this case?
The Acting Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you very much. The member's question is quite redundant because the policy ensures that happens.
The honourable member for Kings West.
My question is to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, last month the Finance Minister said he had to reduce spending by $32 million in order to balance the budget. We know that number has now grown to $54 million. So last week I asked the Education Minister to guarantee for Nova Scotians that school boards in this province would not have to find ways to cut their spending for this budget year. But instead of answering a question put to him about cuts within his department, the minister's response was, the Minister of Finance, in response to a question the other day, indicated that frontline primary to grade 12 education would not be affected. My question, since the Minister won't answer the question put to him, does the Minister stand by the Ham government's promise that school boards across the province will not have to find ways to cut their budgets?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the P-12 classrooms are up and running. They will continue to run, and any change in anything should not be affected unless it's done by the school boards.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia students, parents and teachers are concerned that school boards are being asked to make cuts that could well total hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. If this is the case, how does a budget cut to school boards in the province square with this government's promise that grades primary to 12 would not be impacted because of the Ham government's fiscal mismanagement? This minister must do more to ease the minds of students, parents and teachers in this province, and one way is to tell them as it is. My question, Mr. Minister, is a simple one. Yes or no, are the budgets of school boards in the province being cut?
The honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is one which has been given time and time again. The budgets to the school boards in this province were increased this year.
The honourable member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, even with the simple question of whether or not school board budgets be cut this year, the Minister of Education refuses to answer. This government is breaking its promise to the people of Nova Scotia by inflicting more cuts on an education system when it promised it would not. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Education is more concerned about not answering questions about government actions that will dramatically affect students and parents in the province than telling them where he plans to make cuts within the education system. Mr. Minister, in light of what I'm hearing from school board members, my question again for the Minister of Education is a simple one. Yes or no? Are the budgets of school boards in the province being cut?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, he implied that there had been cuts to the education budget. I told him that simply wasn't the case. He has to begin to listen. The budgets for this school board, the school boards this year have been increased.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment and Labour. This question has proven intractable over the last few years. The residents of Williamswood and Harrietsfield have been fighting the expansion of RDM recycling for years. They are concerned that if the company, which is actually on the site of a former auto salvage yard, is allowed to bury construction and debris material, well water and local waterways will be endangered. It's my understanding that recent water tests have returned troubling results, and the Environment Department is now withholding the permits for RDM. The result of these tests is incredibly important for the community, but my office has been told it will have to file a Freedom of Information request to obtain the results. Mr. Speaker, my question is, would you arrange for the results of these tests to be made public immediately?
Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. Because of the information that's included with regards to the test results, they need to file through the Freedom of Information to ensure that no personal information that shouldn't be given out isn't given out. So at this point in time, they will have to apply through the Freedom of Information.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on your first supplementary.
It's difficult to imagine how much personal information is included in a water test. However, Mr. Speaker, HRM Community Council actually rezoned this site to permit its use as a construction and demolition site, although city staff had recommended specifically against it. Now that these tests also indicate that putting this use on this location isn't a good idea, residents are even more fearful. For more than a year, they have been asking for a full environmental assessment and have been refused. My question is, will you please commit to a full Class 2 environmental assessment before granting this disposal permit?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we're working with the residents in the area, and we're working with the company to ensure that the remediation takes place. What needs to take place to ensure the protection of the people in the area will take place.
Member for Halifax Atlantic on your final supplementary.
I'm not sure that people were really aware that remediation was already an issue. However, HRM and this government have appeared to make decisions without considering the input of the neighbouring communities. Perhaps if I set up a meeting, would you please come to speak with the residents of these communities to tell them about these recent developments, hear their concerns, and explain whatever remediation it is that's become necessary?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my understanding that right now we've contacted the affected individuals and we've contacted the company involved, and we are working through to make sure that they get all the information that is necessary under the circumstances to ensure their health and safety.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, recently officials at the Cape Breton Regional Municipality indicated that they had a study executed by two professors from a university in Newfoundland, concluding that CBRM is not getting its fair share of equalization and transfer payments. Would the Premier be kind enough to provide his analysis of that particular report?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And that is a good question because it is a report that does require some analysis. I had a recent conversation with Minister Clark, and we agreed that the best way forward was to have an independent analysis of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality report to provide it to not only the members of the House, but also to the people of Cape Breton, because it's certainly my understanding that the report leads one to believe that there has not been significant investment in Cape Breton, and we all know that not to be the case.
I'll remember Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, would he be kind enough to indicate who this independent expert or panel of experts are that are going to do this analysis?
Well, the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't have that name at my disposal, but we are talking about doing it internally.
Member Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a little disappointing, indicating...
Order, please. Order, please. Member Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's a bit disappointing given the inference that the Premier left, as if the independent expert had already been drawn upon. So my question to the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, has he or anyone in his department done a cost analysis to ascertain as to whether CBRM is in fact receiving its fair share?
Please, the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Order, please. Just before we go to government business. Order, please. Just before. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce a group of students who are joining us today in the gallery. There's some in the Speaker Gallery and some in the West Gallery. These are grade 9 students from Clayton Park Junior High. There are 2 classes of them, and they're accompanied today by the Vice Principal of the school, Jamie Moore, and their teacher, Joe Murphy, both of whom were here 2 weeks ago with another group, as well as a parent, Mr. Nodine, who was here as well 2 weeks ago and has volunteered twice to come to Province House. So if the students would please rise, we'd like to acknowledge them in the House. Thank you.
Thank you, and certainly welcome our guests to the gallery today. The Honourable Government House Leader on government business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Now, would you please call the order of business public bills for third reading?
Public bills for third reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 2, the Retail Business Uniform Closing Day Act and Labor Standards Code Act?
Bill number 2, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise and speak on third reading of this bill. First, of course, I move third reading. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have debated the pros and cons of Sunday shopping for many years. This bill will bring this debate to a close. It will give the people of Nova Scotia the chance to make a decision on whether or not we have Sunday shopping and whether or not that Sunday shopping is year-round or for part of the year only. Mr. Speaker, this is I think the kind of resolution which will, I believe, provide an end to this debate. And I believe that, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians support their opportunity to have a voice, an important voice, on this important issue. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Nova Scotia has been working with respect to this matter for some considerable period of time. We indicated that we would bring forward a bill that will provide the best worker protection in the country. And Mr. Speaker, I can honestly tell members that I believe that this bill provides the best worker protection for those workers who are now not having to work on Sunday and who may end up having their employer opening on Sunday as a result of the passage of this bill. It will give them the best worker protection in the country. We indicated, the Premier indicated, that that was his goal when this debate was begun. It remains our commitment, and Mr. Speaker, I think it's something that all members of this House can be proud of, the level of commitment that we have demonstrated to making sure that that group of Nova Scotians whose family life may be impacted as a result in a change in Sunday shopping patterns in Nova Scotia are protected. And quite bluntly put, Mr. Speaker, it will give them the right to choose to work on Sunday or not to choose to work on Sunday, and to do so, if they choose not to work on Sunday, without fear of reprisal or recrimination from their employers. I should also indicate, Mr. Speaker, that the bill provides protection for those small business owners who choose not to open on Sunday as well, because in many small businesses in Nova Scotia, where the owners of those small businesses are in a mall or similar kind of arrangement, there was a concern that they would be pressured by the landlord of their premises to open on Sunday. It's simply not viable either for economic reasons or for personal reasons. And again, we wanted to provide the level of protection to this group of Nova Scotians to ensure that they were protected from that. I can also indicate, Mr. Speaker, that I was very, very pleased to see that all parties in this House voted for a series of amendments that were moved by the New Democratic Party at Law Amendments that will provide an increased and improved level of worker protection to Nova Scotians. Those things have been much touted, but for example, after 48 hours of work, now we can be sure that workers who are required to work more than 48 hours in a week will receive a time and a half of their actual hourly wage and not time and a half of the minimum wage, which of course provided no previous protection for anyone who made more than $9 an hour, roughly speaking. We also, of course, have improved the bill by making sure that, for example, if someone has a complaint about Sunday shopping and how they were discriminated against in their workplace, that those complaints can be dealt with in a very timely way. We obviously have another great benefit for Nova Scotian workers, one which I believe the vast, vast majority of Nova Scotian employers were providing anyway, and that is simply 3 weeks of paid vacation to people who made more than, or who worked more than 8 years. But whether or not everyone was doing it or not, it now means it gives people the assurance of knowing that they are going to get that benefit guaranteed. And there is a certain sense of security that I believe that brings to Nova Scotian workers as a result of this very positive change, because now it's not a discretionary item. After 8 years with an employer, you have a right to that paid benefit. And Mr. Speaker, so I think that overall the bill is a better bill. It was a great bill when introduced. It's a better bill today as a result of positive.
Order, please. The honourable member Cape Breton West on a point of order.
No, Mr. Speaker, would the honourable minister be kind enough to accept a short question on a couple of
Justice on a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I think that the time is up past, and I think that we always have tomorrow. If the honourable member would like to ask a question, I'm glad to take a question on the. There won't be a bill tomorrow, but with all due respect, it may be a bill that's passed the House. But in any event, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to continue along, what we have today is a good bill, one that I think that all members of this House should be proud of. It provides a good level of worker protection. It improves improved labor standards. And I might add that the bill, and this is an important component because some people have talked about this, the bill always was intended to improve labor standards issues. The bill was clearly one that was mandated from the beginning, from the moment of introduction, to improve labor protection in Nova Scotia. Because it was when we focused on the Sunday shopping issue that we believed that it was also important to focus on the worker protection issue, because in many respects, they do go hand in glove. And so that is the reason why this bill was never purely about the Uniform Retail Business Closing Day Act, but in fact always involved the labor legislation in this province. And so, Mr. Speaker, with that, I would end my comments, initial comments on third reading, other than to say that I appreciate support from all members of the House in law amendments with respect to the amendments, and I believe we have a good bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not be speaking long on this bill, and I think that it's important to say that the idea of full-time Sunday shopping, whether you agree with the plebiscite in this bill or not, will be decided on another day. and then that will be decided then, Mr. Speaker. I believe, more importantly, Mr. Speaker, that what we have, whatever happens out of that exercise, Mr. Speaker, are vast movements in and around labour standards that have sat dormant for over a quarter century in this province, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, through the negotiations of these, and I call them negotiations, that, and people may want to characterize them in another way, but I would characterize them that way, saying, you know, it's been my experience in that field that you don't always get the whole loaf, that sometimes you have to give something to get something, Mr. Speaker, and you know this was truly that a give and take, and one that you know we tried to get in this instance, tried to get minority government to work, and as I said in second reading, I paraphrased the Premier of saying that he wants minority government to work, but realizes it's not proper that any one of the three parties compromise their principles, Mr. Speaker. And I think this is one that we've tried to do that on. And I believe, therefore, it's one that my party has supported with the amendments and moved amendments. And that's why we're here today at third reading, hoping this bill will go forward, and that I think in the long range, for generations to come, that Nova Scotians will benefit the changes in labour standards. So with that said, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't repeat much of what I said yesterday in the Committee of the Whole House concerning this bill. I would say that the bill is better than nothing. It certainly is a step in the right direction. I would like to congratulate the many people in Nova Scotia who, through their various means, managed to keep this issue alive at a time when the government was suggesting that this wouldn't be resurrected for another 5 years. I think that this is an important opportunity for us to recognize that compromises can be made. This is not a perfect compromise from our perspective, but I think that it is one brought about largely as a result not just of the tenacity of Nova Scotians, but the tenacity of the Liberal caucus, who for the last year and a half has continued to press this particular issue. The changes that have been made specifically with respect to labour standards codes, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest are positive ones. We are, however, disappointed that there wasn't a greater opportunity for Nova Scotians to be consulted. One of the approaches I think that certainly I have had opportunity to discuss with the other leaders of the other parties is that there needs to be greater consultation when it comes to doing the business of Nova Scotia. And this would have been an opportunity for us to walk the walk when it comes to the notion of consultation and allow people who are affected by this legislation, particularly small businesses, small construction businesses, for example, to come before law amendments and express to law amendments their concerns about this. We don't want the precedent to be set in this minority situation where we are having wholesale trades of, that change the complexion of what Nova Scotians were put on notice was to be debated before the House. So while we welcome these changes and we think that they're a step in the right direction, we think that there should have been more consultation. People should have been invited in to speak about the labour standards changes. I would reiterate what I said yesterday with respect to the need for us to come back to the House in the spring of this year to speak about further changes to the labour standards codes, but certainly that would only happen after there's an opportunity for a committee of the House or some other vehicle to consult with Nova Scotians to find out how we can improve this bill. There are two pieces of, two amendments that were turned down that I think we must highlight in fairness to all of this. The member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I think, fairly suggested yesterday that while some of the labour standards codes improvements are positive steps, they aren't particularly related to Sunday shopping. What's unusual is that the two things that were left off the table in the discussions that certainly the parties had around this bill related to Sunday shopping and whether or not Sunday shopping was going to go forward. The most significant of those relates to the consecutive number of hours that somebody would be off before they're obliged to return to work. Notionally, when people talk about the need for someone to have a day off in a 7-day period, what they imagine is that somebody goes to bed on one night, has the full day the next day, and wakes up for breakfast on the next day going back to work. With by changing the Labor Standards Code to ensure that the 24 consecutive hours was changed to 36 consecutive hours. What we could have allowed for was those many people who get off, who finish work on Friday evening to be able to return to work no sooner than Monday morning. That's related to Sunday shopping. That is a direct amendment that we think is a positive step, and we ask the question, what harm could have come from allowing the workers of Nova Scotia to have that modest improvement in labor standards? And instead, we chose to make other changes that I think aren't as connected to the question of Sunday shopping. The other amendment that we proposed in the Committee of the Whole House that I would like to reiterate is the one that relates to whether or not Nova Scotians should have been given a better opportunity to sample what Sunday shopping is all about. What the members in the gallery, or what the visitors in the gallery and the members on the floor will have an opportunity to sample if they choose, is Sunday shopping on the Sundays leading up to Christmas. What they won't be able to choose before they vote next November is Sunday shopping through the months of July or August, for example. And if we are to provide a balance, if we are to level the playing field for Nova Scotians, they should at least know what they are voting for. What harm would have come to allow the people of Nova Scotia to have a more substantial and balanced sample of what it is that they would be getting involved in than to have Sunday shopping as a sample during the months of July and August? One can't necessarily forecast what the result would be. Perhaps Sunday shopping in July, August, June, September of next year would have led to more people voting against the plebiscite and against Sunday shopping. Who knows? That will be determined by Nova Scotians. But at least it would have provided them with a more substantial sample of what it means to test this thing that every other jurisdiction in North America has in some form or other except Nova Scotia. So on the whole, Mr. Speaker, this is a small step forward. It's one that our caucus campaigned on in terms of moving forward with some form of Sunday shopping. We favor the legislation in its present form, don't feel that it goes far enough, but at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I can signal again that it will be our caucus that supports this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Now a member for Cape Breton, Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to rise today to speak about this bill, Mr. Speaker. I come from one of the most ethnic diverse communities in Atlantic Canada, Mr. Speaker.